I'm pleased to be here with Minister Adriana LaGrange, Minister of Education, to announce the next steps in supporting student learning in Alberta. Without a doubt, COVID-19 has had an impact on learning for students in Alberta and all across the country and around the world. We all knew there would be challenges when students returned to in-class learning last fall. And Alberta's government has stepped up in a big way to meet those challenges. To date, school authorities have been provided access to $1 billion in taxpayer funding to address issues related to COVID-19. This includes a $120 million increase in operating funding for all school authorities across the province, $10 million in personal protective equipment, $250 million in accelerated capital maintenance and renewal funding, as well as access to taxpayer-funded board reserves, of which there is $363 million available across the province. And finally, $262 million that the federal government transferred to Alberta, which we subsequently provided to schools. So when it comes to students attending school in person, we've always based our plans on the best medical advice and on operational considerations. Throughout the school year, school authorities have followed our detailed re-entry plan, making our schools safer and limiting the amount of in-school transmission. While schools have been closed in other provinces and places all around the world for most of the past year, Albertans have worked hard to prioritize in-classroom instruction throughout most of the pandemic because it is so important for the welfare of children. I want to thank all school staff, students, parents, guardians and teachers for making that possible and for their diligence and patience during this incredibly challenging time. However, there have been occasions when we've had to shift to at-home learning, including the prolonged school closures at the start of the pandemic a year ago. This has resulted in learning disruptions for our students, which can be especially more difficult in younger grades. Alberta's government wants its students to succeed. We want them to have the best possible education so that they can be successful in school and in life. So today, I am happy to announce additional support to close the gap on pandemic learning loss. Alberta's government will provide up to $45 million in new funding for school authorities to help kids in grades 1 through 3 who are struggling with COVID-19 related learning disruptions. The new funding will focus on the areas of literacy and numeracy, as we know these are key areas where many young kids are struggling. Based on research on reading levels carried out here in Alberta and elsewhere, we know that students in grades 1 to 3 are the ones who have been most negatively impacted by school closures and interruptions. We also know that schools that intervene quickly with struggling readers are able to help students catch up to grade level. In Alberta, research on reading levels by highly acclaimed University of Alberta professor Dr. George Georgiou found that last fall, students in grades 1 to 3 were reading about 8 to 12 months behind their normal grade level. Excuse me. Schools that intervened quickly with struggling readers were able to help about 80% of students catch up to grade level. This is the kind of success we want to duplicate with targeted literacy and numeracy intervention supports for kids. This funding complements work already underway to assess reading levels among students in kindergarten through grade 3. In March, we announced a voluntary literacy assessment program for students in those grades, better to understand the impact of the pandemic on student learning. Our goal is to help assess student reading levels and provide teachers with tools and interventions to support kids in bridging the achievement gap. To date, the program's been very successful. 80 individual school authorities, First Nation schools, independent and charter schools have reached out to access this is support for reading assessments. In addition, the draft elementary curriculum, the reading part of which was actually developed by Dr. Georgiou at the U of A, focuses on literacy, but it also focuses on numeracy, of course, to make sure that students have the skills they need both in and out of the classroom. In fact, literacy and numeracy are woven throughout all subjects and grades in the draft curriculum. Altogether, this investment, the reading assessments, and the new draft curriculum demonstrate Alberta's commitment to students and to providing them with a strong foundation of essential knowledge and skills to succeed in the future. This comes after yesterday's important announcement by Minister Schultz and MLA Matt Jones creating the Alberta Child and Youth Wellbeing Review Panel to hear directly from Albertans, from parents, from youth, from experts, and to help develop an action plan to support working families and kids whose mental health may have been negatively affected by the uncertainty and disruption of the pandemic over these past 15 months. The learning disruptions as a result of COVID-19 are a challenge for the whole education community. We will meet this challenge head on and will safeguard the future of Alberta by investing in our students today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Minister LaGrange to offer her comments.
Thank you, Premier, and good morning to everyone. I am so pleased to be here with the Premier today to announce this incredible investment to support Alberta's students. This year has been like no other in our education system. I cannot thank everyone in the education system enough for their dedication to our students this year. Their efforts have been just outstanding. Despite the incredible work done by students, parents, teachers, and administrators to ensure students can learn safely this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a large impact on learning in Alberta and around the world, particularly with our youngest learners. As the Premier noted, this commitment of up to $45 million in new funding for additional literacy and numeracy programming will enable school authorities to jumpstart targeted programming and interventions this fall for students in grades 1 to 3. This is a major step by Alberta's government to close the gap on pandemic-caused learning loss and ensure our students have a bright future ahead of them. The targeted programming is based on feedback from superintendents from school divisions throughout the province on how best to support early learners. This program will focus on younger grades when students are at a very critical stage in their development. This approach is informed by research, including some from right here in Alberta. This research shows that early learning in literacy and numeracy are critical for setting students up for success in the rest of their education. Research also shows that early intervention with struggling readers can help students catch up by an entire grade level. Without intervention, those students would continue to struggle with their reading throughout the whole of their school life. We have been in constant contact with our education partners since the start of this pandemic. On the issue of learning disruptions, we have been engaging with a group of superintendents since the very beginning of 2021. Their input and suggestions have shaped our approach, which centers on the need to urgently address the pandemic's impact on learning for our youngest learners. This funding will enable school authorities to offer intensive interventions for up to 16 weeks for students in grades 1 to 3 who are identified by school authorities as needing additional support when they return to school in the fall. School authorities are already using a variety of standardized assessments with their students, and they will have flexibility in what assessments they use to identify students who need these additional supports. Public and separate school boards, Francophone, regional authorities, charter school operators, and accredited funded private school operators will also have flexibility to design programming to best meet those local needs. Funding will be available to school authorities through an application process to Alberta Education that identifies the number of eligible students based on teacher assessments. Additional information on the application process will be available to school authorities in the coming weeks. To ensure the program was effective, students will be assessed after the 16 weeks to measure their improvements in literacy and numeracy. The large investment we're announcing today, in addition to the vast pandemic supports outlined by the Premier, as well as the Child and Youth Wellbeing Panel announced yesterday, are among the many, many ways Alberta's government is supporting students during and beyond this pandemic. I look forward to finishing out the school year on a positive note with students in their classrooms and to students and staff enjoying a great Alberta summer. And when students return to classrooms in the fall, I want them to know that Alberta's government has their back. Thank you.
We'll now go to the phones for questions. Just a reminder, we'll do 2 questions each, either 2 off the top or 1 question and 1 follow-up. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Thank you. Yes, the first question is from Kyle Moore, Kicks FM.
Hi there. The first question I have is for Minister LaGrange. Now, we've obviously with the transition to online learning that a number of schools have had to done. That's had a particular effect on some of the rural areas where some of those resources aren't quite as accessible for some students. Now, with these supports being announced here today, how much of a benefit will this have for students in rural Alberta?
This will benefit all students, regardless if they're in rural Alberta or in one of our metros. Every student that needs this targeted support will have access to this targeted support. So it will benefit, we anticipate, approximately about 50,000 students right across Alberta.
And you have a follow-up, Kyle?
The second question I have is actually for Premier Jason Kenney. This maybe slightly off topic, but obviously we've seen a lot about the provinces reopening and how that's tied to vaccination rates. Now, the vaccination rates up here in sort of the northwestern part of the province are a little lower than we're seeing in some other areas of the province, and there's been some things I've heard from people around here about kind of hesitancy on getting some of these shots. So what can you say to those, I guess, people out there who are still a little hesitant about getting one of those COVID vaccines?
Well, what I can say is the vaccines are their ticket back to normal and to reclaiming all of our freedoms. The vaccines are safe and they are effective. They're not just a way to keep yourself safe, but a way to protect your loved ones, your neighbors, and the whole community. I think there's nothing more Albertan than doing something together to help others. And that's exactly what getting the jab means. I can tell you I've had it myself. I didn't feel a thing. I had no side effects. The vast majority of people have no side effects. We'll be sending out a lot more information to people who might be hesitating or on the fence about getting vaccinated. We've already sent out a mailer to every household in the province, just informing them about how they can most conveniently get vaccinated. We've done everything we can just to make it easy for folks, working with local pharmacies. And I've also asked the health department to reach out to areas like, for example, the communities up in the far north that have lower uptake levels so far, to just make it easier for people. There might be a lot of folks with shift work and in remote areas that it's just not convenient. So we want to break down any inconvenience to getting the jab for folks in more remote areas like the far north. But we'll also be sending out a mailer and launching a ad campaign that takes on some of the, I think, misconceptions about, for example, the safety of the vaccine. Let me just share a stat with you and your listeners. We have delivered 2.5 million doses, 2.2 million first doses, so that's well over half of our population. And so far, we have recorded about 390 so-called adverse events. Those are significant negative side effects. So that means that these vaccines are 99.99% safe. 99.99% safe. Now, I know at the beginning of the COVID-19 vaccines back in December, January, some people, I think understandably, said, well, this seems to be happening pretty quick. I'm not sure I want to rush into this, want to take time and see how it works. Well, we've taken time and we can see how it works. Now, 6 months into hundreds of millions of people around the world having received multiple different brands of COVID-19 vaccines, we can conclude with absolute certainty that these vaccines are safe and they are effective. And they are if we don't have large numbers sign up and get vaccinated, then the only tool that we have to control viral spread, to protect our hospitals and prevent deaths are restrictions that none of us like and none of us want. So I would just say to folks, if you're getting your information off of, what people posted on Facebook or something, and give it a second look. Please come to the official, scientific, authorized sources. Go to the AHS website. Check out what the actual medical experts say. Listen to the medical professionals. Don't listen to Buddy down the street who tells you that your arm is going to get magnetized if you get the vaccine.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Dean Bennett, Canadian Press.
Oh, good morning. My first question is for Minister LaGrange. The $45 million, I'm not clear. What exactly is that paying for? I'm assuming it would go right to, say, teacher aides or something like that to help these students out. Is that where the bulk of the money is going?
To some extent, Dean. So what we will be doing is ensuring that school authorities, first they will assess the students come fall, and then when they have their numbers, they will apply to my department, and we will roll the money out to those school authorities. They may choose to hire additional teachers. They may choose to hire substitute teachers to relieve teachers so they can do this targeted small group one-to-one or small group intervention with those students that require those supports, or they may hire additional EAs. It will certainly be up to the school authorities to determine how they're going to spend those dollars, how they're going to roll out those programs, but the dollars are there to ensure that they have those resources that they need.
And a follow-up, Dean?
Thank you. An off-topic question for the Premier, if I may. Can I get an update, please, on the two elements of the Fair Deal panel? You mentioned in March you want to have a decision by the end of spring on pursuing leaving CPP, and also on the RCMP. I understand the report's now in. Can I get an update on where you are with those two files?
Thanks, Dean. On the question about a potential Alberta Provincial Police Force, which was recommended by the Fair Deal panel, we commissioned a independent review, I believe by Price Waterhouse. I've been briefed on an interim report. I've not yet seen the final report. I look forward to receiving that, and there will be a cabinet discussion around that. And secondly, we did also commission a major analysis of the potential costs, benefits, and structure of a Alberta pension plan, similar to the Quebec pension plan, and that was done by Morneau Chappelle. We're doing additional actuarial, economic and legal analysis on all of that to make a well-informed decision about how we proceed. Those issues will be coming before Cabinet next month. We have not made final decisions about when or whether to go forward. I do think there are strong arguments in favor of both of those concepts. I must tell you, I've become increasingly optimistic about strengthening Alberta, making our province more resilient and more autonomous within the Federation in the same ways that Quebec has done so successfully with those kinds of enhanced powers for Alberta. In the case of the concept of a provincial police, we know that our local municipal police forces do a good job at providing community policing. And while we very much respect the service of the RCMP, the reality is that because it's a national police force, they have people coming and going out of the province every few years, which it doesn't give us the same kind of grounded local community policing structure as that a local police force would. And so I think in principle, rural Albertans deserve the same benefits in terms of community policing as do Indigenous communities that our larger cities have with their municipal police forces. But that's something where we're going to have to make a final decision looking at all of the costs and benefits and consulting with Albertans. And on the pensions, again, the big issue there is the huge demographic advantage that Alberta has had, not just now, but for the better part of 4 decades. That has accumulated very significantly, and it means that Alberta could enhance benefits for pensioners, reduce payroll taxes for workers and job creators, which would be a big economic boost and enhance the Alberta advantage. So those are all factors that we're taking into account as we continue to analyze those concepts.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Don Braid, Calgary Herald.
Premier, 2 questions. First, you just mentioned demographic advantage. I presume you mean youth, and if you could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it, and then I'll ask you a second.
Yeah, exactly. Alberta's average age is well below the national average age. We have the youngest population in the country. We have had for decades. And over time, that has accumulated significantly in terms of the net contributions to the CPP and the portion of that fund that rightfully belongs to Albertans. And the CPP legislation was written with that in mind. That's how Quebec operates its own plan, has done so very successfully for nearly 60 years. I always find a bit curious the the naysayers who don't believe Alberta has the ability to exercise the same kind of powers that our friends in Quebec have done so well for so long. But the demographic advantage is not just in the relative youth of our population. By the way, we saw it last year. 8 of the 10 provinces saw population decline. Only 2 provinces saw population growth. Alberta was one of them because we have the highest birth rate. We have the highest birth rate in part because we have the youngest population, so it's kind of self-perpetuating. Secondly, our demographic advantage is also found in our historically higher labor force participation rate. That's the percentage of working age people who actually are in the labor force, working or looking for work. And before the price crash in 2014-15, I believe Alberta's typical labor force participation rate was like 74, 75% versus about 63, 64% across the country. I remember these stats because I was the federal employment minister at the time, and a huge advantage. And even in this tough last year, we continued to have a higher share of our population in the workforce paying CPP premiums than the rest of Canada. So you take the young population, you take more people working, more people paying payroll taxes. That means more value accruing in the CPP, and that is a big demographic advantage.
And your follow-up, Don?
Yes, on Stampede, Premier, you seem to have set quite a challenge or quite a vision for the Stampede, that it might be entirely open. And yet the Stampede faces the challenge of organizing this thing when, because of your own, as included in your own standards, things could change if the infections go off the rails and so forth. So I wonder, first of all, what's your attitude? What do you actually expect the Stampede to do? Will you be disappointed if it's kind of truncated personally, because you seem to, as most people are, be very enthusiastic about a full Stampede? And is the government prepared to do anything to help with this? Because it seems to be a massive logistical challenge for the Stampede.
Well, thanks for the good question, Don. We're not going to compel anybody or any organization to put on events. It's what we are doing is laying out a safe and cautious plan for reopening based on the science. As you heard yesterday from Dr. Hinshaw, this is a plan that was developed by her as Chief Medical Officer and her team, based on their careful scientific analysis of the protective effect of vaccines and the experience of other jurisdictions around the world that have opened up at lower levels of population protection and continue to see COVID numbers fall. So we believe that this is a safe and prudent plan. And I would just underscore that for the Stampede or any other major event organizers, that once we get to 70% plus population protection, it basically means that COVID is going to be running increasingly into a wall of resistance with immunity in the vast majority of the population. On the actual nature of the Stampede, I understand they put out a statement yesterday outlining the kinds of activities they're looking forward to putting on. I think that's great. And I will tell you this, Don, we have been working, and we've been very public about this, we've been working through Alberta Health with the Stampede organizers and other major events organizers across the province since, I believe, January, maybe before, just to answer their questions, lay out potential scenarios, potential contingencies. We simply weren't in a position to provide a final clear parameters until this week, as we've seen the huge increase in vaccination and the huge decline in COVID numbers. But we've been in communication with them all along so that they could do contingency planning and different scenarios. For example, I mentioned, I think 2 days ago, that we worked out a Plan B contingency for them if we don't meet the 70% threshold, for example, we've given them a contingency about what we think the parameters would look like, which would basically be 50% capacity. So I'm sure that Alberta Health is in touch with them on a daily basis to answer their questions, to help them make decisions. If there's any other assistance that they need, we're ready to assist. But it's not just the Stampede; it's other major events as well. And you know, these events are the lifeblood of our community. One of the things I've been most concerned about through COVID is just the morale of people. Another way of putting that, I guess, is their mental and emotional health. And I think being able to get out and reconnect as a community is actually a critically important part. I see some cynicism from the usual suspects on Twitter and whatnot, deriding the Stampede and you know, mocking the whole idea of the Stampede. The Stampede is an awesome community event. It is, I think, yeah, we call it the greatest outdoor show on earth because it's not just a midway and a rodeo. It's the whole city finding ways to celebrate our Western heritage, our rural roots, and our togetherness as a community. So I think those are very important things for us to embrace as we go into a totally different phase of COVID, a phase where we have achieved population protection.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Thank you. Next caller is Shannon Johnson, CTV Calgary.
Thank you for taking my call. This question is for the Premier. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization says now that there is a greater vaccine supply flowing into Canada, second doses should be given as soon as possible. How long will Albertans have to wait between their first and second shot?
Well, we'll be making an announcement about exactly that early next week. We appreciate the advice of the National Advisory Committee. And as Dr. Hinshaw said yesterday, we'll be making an announcement early next week about opening up bookings for second dose shots. It is important to underscore that we are well ahead of the rest of Canada already in administering second doses. In fact, we're twice as high as the national average amongst Canadian provinces in second dose administration. So we've got a good head start there. I'll just give you an example. Today, I understand Ontario announced they're opening up second dose appointments for people aged 80 and over. Well, we've already vaccinated over 75% of the population aged, just to correct that, we've vaccinated 70% of Albertans over the age of 75. So that just shows you that we've already got a significant advantage. And frankly, I believe one of the reasons we may have been seeing a much lower death rate than large provinces, particularly this spring, was the decision to double dose the vast majority of the very elderly, of seniors and people with serious chronic conditions. So we've got a head start, but we're glad to have this clearance from NACI. And most importantly, we're glad to have the supply to make this possible, because the science was very clear that we should maximize first dose protection until we had adequate supply to pivot back to second doses. We've followed the advice of the National Advisory Committee and the Alberta Advisory Committee on Immunization, as well as the Chief Medical Officer at every step of the way, and we'll do so by opening up a broader access to second dose vaccines next week. As I said yesterday, we are scheduled to receive over 1.1 million doses in the next month, and as of yesterday, we had about, I think, 550,000 appointments for first doses. So that shows you that we're now getting enough quantity that we can do both.
Do you have a follow-up, Shannon?
I do, yes, thank you. Harm reduction professionals say safe consumption sites are saving lives. So why is the provincial government getting rid of Calgary's only site?
Well, we're not. We'll be replacing it. In the last campaign, we ran on a very explicit commitment to do an analysis of the social and economic impacts of illegal drug sites on local communities. As you know, there's been devastating impact in terms of crime and antisocial behavior around, for example, the Schumer site in the Beltline part of Calgary. And I know that the approach of the NDP was to ignore those people who raised those concerns and call them names and say that they were not compassionate. But we think that we can address the challenge of addictions, provide necessary support, and a full spectrum of services from harm reduction to lifetime recovery, that we can do all of those things in a much more effective way without the kind of very negative implications for the local community. That's why we kept our commitment to Albertans to engage a panel of experts, including people related to those who died of overdoses, to consult broadly with Albertans, including affected communities, on the efficacy and safety and the social and economic implications of some of those sites. And that will be informing a government decision that will be announced in the near future. There will continue to be injection sites available, but in a much safer and more targeted way. I'll just point out to you that in Lethbridge, following a series of very troublesome financial revelations, the province suspended funding to the Arches organization, and there were similar predictions that this was going to be very dangerous. We replaced it with a temporary site in Lethbridge, and there was no measurable negative consequences. So we've taken 2 years to carefully study this, and we'll be making an announcement in the very near future.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Harry Tate, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is for the Premier. I'm wondering, as we look at Manitoba, surveying, collecting information on whether or not it would be wise to offer cash or gift cards for vaccine hesitance. We've seen the lotteries in the United States. I'm wondering, with Alberta's rate of vaccine hesitancy, whether you're considering doing some sort of incentive as well.
Well, first of all, I'm just going to, Carrie, just challenge the notion that, well, I think you implied that we have a significant vaccine hesitancy problem. We don't see that, at least not yet. I mean, obviously there are some areas with lower levels of uptake, and you would expect that. You're not going to get equal uptake in every region and every demographic group. That just stands to reason. But our polling has, not just our polling, but the polling done by media and public opinion research organizations all indicates that the vaccine hesitancy has declined quite considerably in Alberta. I'd like to think that's partly a success of our promotion efforts and just people seeing that the vaccines are safe. So we think we're down now to about 10%, the same 10% who are the hardcore opponents of vaccines. We probably can't persuade them, but probably about another 5% who are disinclined but maybe persuadable. So listen, if we can get to over 80%, push up towards 85% based on the current public opinion research, I would not characterize that as a vaccine hesitancy problem. As you know, we've now, as a country, blown past where the United States is on first dose coverage. They started to choke in terms of first dose demand, running into a hesitancy wall about a month back. So I think we're better positioned than the U.S. Now, having said all of that, we want to leave no stone unturned when it comes to getting as many people as vaccinated as possible, given the huge health and social benefits. And so I have asked our health department to consider some of those creative incentives for people to get incentivized to get vaccinated, as soon as we start to see a significant decline in first dose demand, we will consider options like that. I see that, when my friend Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio announced their $1 million lottery and scholarships for youth to get vaccinated, there was a lot of mockery and ridicule, but apparently it worked. I understand that the week that they announced this, they saw a 45% increase in new vaccine registration amongst the target populations, and I see that Governor Newsom in California has just announced a massive lottery program in his state. So we'll take a look at that, at those precedents to see how they work and to be creative about how we can incent people. So really, I'll just, like at this stage, we're about to launch a refreshed marketing effort. We are setting up temporary clinics, like the one in Calgary Northeast, reaching out to employers for large work sites, trying to break down barriers to accessing the vaccines. But, so that's, eventually we'll get into a game of inches, and maybe incentives like that will be helpful. No decisions have been made at this point, though.
Carrie, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that answer, Premier. The other thing I'm wondering, we've seen you come out really strong against conspiracy theories, both on COVID as a whole and on vaccines. But at the same time, you've been disparaging media reporters as elites, which breeds mistrust with the public and what the media is saying. Why are you doing that, kind of undermining that, when the media are the people who are trying to get accurate information about vaccines out?
Carrie, sometimes this will shock you. Sometimes I think that media don't always get it accurate, and I have the right to be critical when that happens. You guys have a right to take shots at politicians when you think that they're not on point. And in a democracy, I think that can be a two-way street. But I try to be always respectful in our media relations. But I don't accept double standards, and I don't apologize for highlighting those when I see them.
Operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Thank you. The last caller is Audrey Nouveau, Radio Canada.
Hi, Premier. Thank you for taking my questions. I'd like to hear you in French and English as usual. This amount is for grades 1 to 3, but what about students in grades 4 to 12? They've also been really impacted by COVID, and their education has been disrupted too. So what additional investments will you be making to help them catch up too?
Okay, Audrey, I'll ask Minister LaGrange to respond in English, and then I'll translate that into French, although she could also do it in Italian if you like. But go ahead, Adriana.
We'll stick with the English. Thank you for the question. And really, working with our superintendents, we really saw that it's those really early years. So the grades 1 to 3 that are seeing the most significant loss in their learning. Of course, our education system, our teachers, they're amazing at helping all of the other students catch up. But as we move forward, this is the most pressing need that we're seeing right now. We're going to address the most pressing need, and as we move forward, if there are additional needs, we will be looking to address them.
En français, ça veut dire qu'on va continuer à surveiller la situation pour tous les étudiants, l'impact de la pandémie. Mais jusqu'à maintenant, la recherche indique que les étudiants, les élèves qui ont été affectés plus profondément sont les plus jeunes, sont les petits enfants qui ont vraiment perdu beaucoup de leur apprentissage à lire et de leur capacité à cet égard. Alors, ça, c'est le focus maintenant. Mais s'il y a des recherches qui indiquent qu'il faut donner des ressources supplémentaires aux élèves plus âgés, nous le ferons.
And did you have a follow-up, Audrey?
Yes, and maybe we can do the same format again. Why do school boards have to apply for this money? Like, why? It's going to take time for them to assess which students need the most help, and they don't have any guarantees of extra funds, so are they expected to spend their own money for that?
Well, school divisions have assessments that they put in place. They already have access to these assessments, and there's a wide variety that they utilize on a regular basis. So the reason for the targeted approach and the application approach is so that we know that those students that really need those services are actually going to get them. And so this way we can guarantee that those assessments will be done, and that we will have the pre and post assessments, so we can actually track the improvements that have been made using this targeted approach.
Could you just, I'm trying to figure out what to say, how to say that in French.
So basically, having an application process allows for the opportunity for school divisions to target those individuals. We know for a fact that they will be assessed. There will be a pre-assessment and a post-assessment.
OK. Alors, ça donne aux commissions scolaires l'occasion à cibler l'aide aux enfants, aux classes et aux écoles qui ont besoin vraiment de cette aide pour l'éducation supplémentaire pour les jeunes enfants, parce que la situation n'est pas la même dans toutes les commissions scolaires ni dans toutes les écoles. Alors, dans certains coins, il y a des besoins plus importants et le processus pour la commission scolaire de déposer les demandes, l'aide donne l'occasion à cibler les ressources et l'aide éducationnelle où il y a le plus grand besoin.
And that concludes our time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.